At Culture Shift, software and service go hand in hand. Our award-winning platform is just the beginning of the journey towards ending harassment and discrimination. We support our partners in building the infrastructure to prevent and respond to misconduct reports and build the trust that's needed for their communities to see that change is possible. Our team of culture shifters have decades of experience supporting organisations that are struggling to combat harassment and discrimination. But we know that we can't do this alone. That's why everything that we do and build is in collaboration with our users, keeping them at the centre of our research, design, and development. We've invested years of research into understanding why people report and why they don't, so we can consistently innovate to increase reporting rates across different organisations. By working closely with our team of customer success managers, our partners are continually being developed into expert system users. Their insight and knowledge is an invaluable resource in guiding our product roadmap. It's this collaboration that has led to the growth of our full wraparound support service, with the introduction of additional features such as our behavioural change campaigns and community of practice, where partners come together to inspire change and learn with us. We're always guided by data, understanding how reporters and case managers interact with the system so that we can continue to add value. This is why our service has become essential to our partners' day-to-day operation. And we know that because they tell us. That's why we've become the higher education sector's #1 partner for tackling misconduct through reporting. And we're fast becoming the private sector's preferred partner too. Because the students of today are the workforce of tomorrow. Here at Culture Shift, we're building more than just technology. We're building a solution to end the problem.
Now, good morning, everyone. My name is Kenya, as I mentioned, for those of you that have just joined us. I work here at Culture Shift. We are a tech for good organization whose main mission is to support organizations in creating cultures where people can feel like they belong or are safe to speak up if they don't. I'm joined today by both Matt and Yasmin, but I'll give you both the opportunity to introduce yourselves now. So to kick off, Matt, we'll go to you first. It would be great if you could introduce yourself, but in so doing, kind of answer the topic of the question of the topic today. So from your thoughts, what is the cross-functional relationship between HR and ED&I supposed to look like?
Sure. Yeah, answer it in one go. Anyway, hi, everyone. My name is Matt Foster. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Ogilvy UK. For those of you not familiar with Ogilvy UK or Ogilvy, it's was actually one of the original sort of Madison Avenue old school advertising agencies. I'm very glad to say it's no longer male dominated by folks smoking cigars and drinking whiskey during office hours. My background is not HR. I came into DEI as a sort of second career over the last 10 years. So I come at it from maybe more of a commercial perspective, which I think will be interesting for today's conversation. I think I could say ideally the relationship should be symbiotic, collaborative. I know there's a kind of sound like buzzwords, maybe a word that's a little more graspable or accessible is a partnership, and one that's embedded in having a good relationship both ways, not unilateral. And we'll dig into some of that, I think, maybe later on. So I'm a pleasure to be here today, and thank you for inviting me, Kenya.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. It's always a pleasure speaking with you. And we also have Yasmin on the call with us today. And Yasmin, this is our first webinar with you, but I'm incredibly excited after the chats we've had thus far to delve into this topic with you. So if you'd like to introduce yourself, and same question to you. So what should that relationship between HR and ED&I look like?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Yasmin. So I'm the Senior People and Talent Partner at Charlie HR. I've worked in HR for over 10 years, starting my career in very corporate HR, moving to tech, more small SMEs over the last 5 years. And I think for me, I've never had the option or luxury even to have a dedicated ED&I team. So, you know, that in itself comes with its own challenges. But for me personally, it's allowed me to grow EDI a lot more organically. I think there's a big reliance when you don't have a dedicated EDI team to rely on your networks, LinkedIn, Slack groups. And as Matt said, collaboration is a huge part of it. I think a big success metric for me has been team collaboration, relying very heavily on the people managers. So, you know, my role within Charlie and the other tech companies that I've worked in is primarily, you know, to be there as their people HR function and embed EDI in everything that we do. But I can't do that alone. Where it's my accountability, it's everyone's responsibility. And I think over the years, it's been learning how to make everyone care about that responsibility and understand how they input into it. And I think, yeah, a key message, I suppose, in terms of how do they work is definitely like team collaboration. And I think sometimes it's knowing how to collaborate with everyone in the company and when to bring them in and when is the right time. It is a very important topic. People feel strongly about it and some people feel very differently towards it. And I think not establishing a clear vision of what you want to do and how you want to align EDI with HR or within your wider business can allow you to run in the wrong direction quite quickly. So I think, yeah, understanding what you want to actually achieve, some basic targets, and then going out and cross collaborating with different people within the business. So yeah.
Amazing. That was such an incredible answer, because I think you've touched on a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today. And as part of signing up to the webinar, a lot of you have asked questions, and what we've tried to do is make sure that the questions that we'll get through today touch on a lot of the things that came up in those questions, such as, you know, what is that separation between accountability and responsibility. But I think what you're going to bring to this conversation, Yasmin, as you touched on, is in not having that ED&I team, that ED&I role within your organization now and the roles that you've been in before, you've had to really lean into that idea of cross-functionality and EDI as a concept and a process that you can apply to different functions and how it requires everybody leaning in. So with that, it requires people to, you know, have to influence those stakeholders around the business. So how can people start to do that across both functions, so HR to EDI and vice versa, to create shared goals around the organizations? And I'll go to, well, Matt first. You came off mute.
I have. Well, yeah. How do we have shared goals? And Yasmin mentioned it very eloquently in her introduction, and that's kind of key. I think you have to take a step back, and I know we're talking very specifically here about the relationship between EDI and HR, but we have to remember that we're here to enable the business or the organization if you're in a charity. So whatever organization you work in, however it's structured, whether you are a corporate, whether you are like I am in an agency where you're you're consulting, as are you, Kenya, in your business, or whether you're a charity or a not-for-profit, right? We need to understand what the overall goals are of the organization. Are they charitable goals? Are they business goals, corporate goals, etc.? That's usually driven by the CEO. That's their job. I report into the CPO, so I report straight into the C-suite. I am part of the overall board, though, so that does give me a certain amount of decision-making processes, decision-making powers. And being able to impact some of those processes and decision-making conversations that are going to be had. But ultimately, you know, we start off with what that macro goal is up there, and then we have to build down from it and think about, okay, you know, what are there for our, how does the people element of that overall goal, what does that look like? That's usually driven by the CPO. That might not be the same in certain organizations that are small, et cetera, but there will be people who broadly have those kinds of responsibilities. So when it comes to the HR team and the EDI team, or in my case, I'm just one person. I don't have a dedicated team, but I am a wholly dedicated EDI resource. How do we then support those sort of wider macro goals, but on a people level through the lens of people? And that obviously covers every element of the employee journey, each kind of point along the trajectory from talent acquisition, onboarding, all the way through to offboarding, and then understanding and mapping out which of those elements, in fact, most of them probably involve a level of EDI, and working collaboratively around what that looks like. So that shared vision is something that everyone works towards and plans towards. And we are all sort of setting strategy together. We're setting an overall people strategy. So we've just come through a long planning session, for instance, at Ogilvy UK, which we started about 4 months ago or 5 months ago for 2024. Each function, whether it was talent acquisition, learning and development, ED&I, all these sort of functions or sub-functions that sit within the people team, we sat together around the table and presented a draft idea of what we needed to do or what our functions needed to do. But they were only draft because we needed to talk to each other and we needed to say, this is the direction we need to go in to support our organizational goals. And then we figured out how we could work together on some of those projects and some of the natural synergies. Now, that's really best practice. It does not always happen that way. And I'm sure I think there's scope in our discussion to talk about what it shouldn't look like and what it's like when it goes wrong. Because I do have experience of that from previous places I've worked. But broadly speaking, that's it. You need to make sure you get around the table with all the different sort of sub-functions within the people team. You have to make sure that overall you're supporting the CEO's vision, but you're also delivering delivering that through that people lens.
And that's really interesting. So just kind of to drill into the practicality of that, you had those kind of heads or representatives from each of the core people functions, and they came prepared or armed with almost their intentions of what they needed to achieve in terms of their goals, and from that created this shared vision.
That's right. So we have let's see, to dig into the sort of granular detail. I mean, our people team is quite large. We service an agency that's about 950,000 people. Our people team itself is about 35 people. We have generalists, we have talent acquisition, we have folks who look after health and well-being and benefits, payroll, etc. Everything you can think of in a sort of large business organization. Within that team, we have people who lead those different functions or sub-functions, right? So we have someone who leads talent acquisition, we have someone who leads ED&I. I say I lead it, but I'm also the only person in it, like technically. And we can probably also talk about how that works in terms of how I can implement, because I'm only one person and I can't implement everything. So our sort of SLT, our sort of senior leadership team within the people team, it is our responsibility to work well with each other. It is our responsibility to always see people strategy as an integrated thing, and be quite as much as possible, just try and be as integrated and agile as possible to pull the right people in, whether it's for formal planning, whether it's for, hey, can I just get your thoughts on this, or oh, I've just encountered this issue and actually it requires me to bring you in because clearly this has been triggered or this has been sort of raised, and now it's become something that we need to look at together. So that's how we're doing it currently at Ogilvy, and it's it works quite well. Obviously it's not without its challenges, but that's kind of the best practice that I've been seeing that's been quite effective.
That's really, really interesting and really good to hear how that's working with you guys. I suppose, Yasmin, you're quite the flip side, where there isn't that kind of person almost to lead and spearhead that. So from your perspective then, how do you believe people can go about influencing those stakeholders and creating those shared goals?
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to what Matt said in the sense of it's all about building those relationships, and it may fall more in my favor because I'm already going to those senior leaders with a people strategy, and EDI is already embedded within those kind of policies, within those initiatives. But essentially, if you don't have those relationships with those senior leaders, it's about making those relationships or making room at that table so that conversation is happening and it's on the agenda. I think a way I think, a lot of leaders care about it. I think what the difference is there's a difference between caring and making it a priority. And it's about how do we make this a priority? I know you care, but caring is not enough. So it's educating on the mutual benefits. And I think the way to approach this is most organizations, businesses will have an overarching objective, and it's thinking, okay, how do my key results or objectives fall into the wider company mission so that I can show that this has a business impact, leveraging on things like data analytics. So if you've got surveys, if you've got things like actually having a diverse pipeline has showed that our onboarding experience, the feedback from surveys, the innovation that actually having all these different people from different skill sets has actually shown that this team has been able to deliver XYZ. Go into those conversations armed with that kind of information is only going to set your stall for a better case. And, approaching the way that I approach ED&I, it's very much part of my people strategy, which if we take a step back, how does this fit into the wider business? It's enablement. So I enable the employees to be able to do their jobs so that they can deliver on your key metrics, which essentially generates revenue, which is the terms that, the buzzwords that people want to hear. And then once you kind of get people's attention, then you can start drilling down into the importance of actually there's so much more to this in terms of right from hiring to offboarding someone as to why we have to take ED&I so seriously. I think highlighting success stories that you may have within the organization is a great way. So things that are currently happening, things that have potential to happen. So if you have flexible parental policies and actually someone is singing the praise that allowed them to come back to work feeling charged and motivated, and actually it changed their perspective of going to find a new job in 12 months and actually the return on investment for the business. So approaching those conversations from that stance. But then I think you have to approach it fairly as well. And it's going back to that mutual benefit and understanding the organizational direction. So understanding, okay, from a stakeholder perspective, if they say no to this, can I understand why they say no to it? And does it feel fair? So yeah, I think that's a really important one. But then also, if you are finding yourself having a tough time, then working with external providers or getting some coaching yourself so that you can provide training and resource, I think it's a really good starting point if you are not kind of getting the results or having the conversations that you hope for, and you do feel like you're having a bit of a tough time, because that can happen as well. And again, it's not necessarily because people don't care, it's because they don't see it as a priority. So yeah, getting external people in, coaching your senior leadership team. And I think that's always a good place to start anyway, if you are kind of, approaching ED&I for the first time within your organization, or it's quite a new topic. I think training across the board is great, but starting with that senior leadership team, because essentially that's how you're getting your sign off to do things, is so important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And you raised a really good point there around the importance of having that senior leadership support. I mean, Matt touches on it. Being on the board makes all of the difference, and making sure that it's being discussed on the board makes all of the difference in how you can ensure that those conversations permeate throughout the organization.
Yeah, Kenya, I just want to build on that because it is super, super important. Sorry to interrupt. Just that talking about, my career, I've had experience of having this role in an organization where I was not on the board, but I was still a senior director, but not on the board. And my current role, where I am a director and I am on the board, the difference is immense. In a previous organization that I worked in, it was as if the function of ED&I was siloed, it was separate, and I was hired to do ED&I for the organization. It's as if one person could just do it, as very much tokenistic, very much a tick box exercise. Now, but yes, and also to give a certain level of credit to the organization, and I'm not here to name and shame. That's not what this is about at all. This is really talking about best practice. I don't think it was intentionally tokenistic. I think it was really a matter of where they were on their ED&I journey, and the fact that they didn't really truly understand it or grasp it. And to Yasmin's several really good points in what she just talked about, didn't understand the value of it. And if you don't understand the value of it, you're not going to integrate it into your into your organization. You're not going to see it as a business imperative. You're not going to see it as being able to actually deliver on your bottom line. And you're going to think that, well, I need to do this because people are doing it, so I'll hire someone to do it for us. And that's not how it works. It can't be that way because it's not real. It's not sustainable. And the person who does it will quickly find out that that's the situation they're in, probably burn out and probably feel very disaffected. And that was certainly how I felt. And you know, I certainly wanted to find a role in which an organization at least understood those basics, that it was a business imperative, that it did need to be integrated into sort of the entire organization, that the person who led on that strategy should have a seat at the table at board level, should be a senior decision maker, should be having conversations with the C-suite. Those were all things that completely changed, you know, in my sort of career, my career experience changed the game for me. But, you know, thinking outside myself also changed the game for the success of ED&I within the organization that I'm currently in, because so much of it is about those, you know, those power dynamics and who has power, who doesn't, who has the ability to make decisions, reporting lines and structures and all those kinds of things. Where you sit on the organogram, actually, the straight lines and the dotted lines, all of those things are really, really important. You could find yourself with a great title and even a fantastic salary, but you might be completely hamstrung and not able to affect any change. And you know, quite frankly, I'd much rather take a pay cut, which I did actually, in order to be in a place where I could be effective, and could, you know, could lead an actual real change agenda.
That's so what you're saying there is really relates to something that Yasmin was saying before around, you know, you're going to get that opposition as you try and create change, and being able to understand why that exists and therefore how to overcome it is going to help you progress this forward. So whether that be by making sure you're in the right position within the organization to understand what those challenges are and how to overcome them, or by aligning yourself and creating those allies throughout the organization that are going to help you to do that, is key here. And this is a great time for a shameless plug of our next webinar next month, which is about overcoming resistance to change. So being able to see resistance, understand it, and find ways to overcome it, which I'll drop a link to in the chat in a moment. But before we do that, well, that also leads on to the next question. And so the next question is about whose job it is to ensure that both functions, HR and ED&I, collaborate effectively. But I think we've touched on really well the fact that, you know, this is everybody's responsibility. And the next part of the question is, you know, how do we make sure that those goals are consistently met? And I'd like to hone in on that part of the question. So how do we make sure that, you know, if we're saying that everyone needs to chip in here, how do we make sure that things actually get done? Yasmin, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, no, I think it's very similar to what Matt was saying, in the sense of ED&I has to feel organic. You know, you can hire an ED&I specialist and it's not going to work if you're like, job done, we've got our person and they're going to change the world. No, it's not really going to work. And I think both our roles, I'm coming from it from a HR perspective, in the sense of I embed it. Matt's obviously an expert and that's exactly what he's hired to do. But I think we both probably face the same challenge of, it's everyone's responsibility. This has to be from the ground up. It has to be organic. It can't just be on me. And I think ensuring that those goals are met is, again, the exec team is so important. And the fact that Matt can sit on the board is fantastic. You know, we have representation on the board, but it's very much from a people, ED&I and HR perspective. Having ED&I on its own in the board is fantastic, and if you can get that, do it. I think the HR team, it's a big responsibility for me. It's part of my job. I don't have an ED&I team, so it's embedding ED&I into our KRs, into what it is we're wanting to achieve, thinking about when we're creating policies or initiatives, actually is this coming from a lens? Has this got an ED&I lens on it? So when we're thinking, how do we hire here? It isn't just kind of, okay, time to hire, we're done. We've kind of achieved that goal. It's thinking, actually, is it being inclusive? Are we reaching out to underrepresented, groups in our networks? How it's thinking about ED&I in everything that we do and keeping ourselves accountable and doing that through, yes, targets, through vision statements, but I think more importantly, when you're setting your KPIs or KRs each quarter, however your company operates, it's fed into that as well. So it's never just kind of a separate metric for me. It's in everything that we do. I think as well, you'll have across the business potentially people who are passionate, ED&I champions, I call them, and by nature they want to get involved, they've got ideas, leverage those, like support those people, get them involved, set up working groups, they'll massively help engagement and make things happen. And I think success of like events, conversations, training, I think they're all ways to kind of keep yourself accountable on macro levels. I think the bigger picture comes from data. So when you're running your survey, how are you improving? What is the actual change? Your employment engagement survey, what are people saying? Does the place actually feel different? Does it look different? And then measuring yourself. I think for me previously, I've always gone to places that are quite small. ED&I has started or it's just building. So I've always kind of set myself targets based on how we want to get better, basically. So, okay, this is where we're at. How can we do better? And then when we get to a place where it's like, actually, we're at a really healthy place, let's start benchmarking against industry standard. But I think the best measure is being better than the version of yourself the last year or the last half year. And then when you're in a really healthy place, you can start then being like, okay, let's start benchmarking against companies that are similar to us, a similar size, similar investment. But yeah, I think just taking it step by step and not being kind of like, this is where we are and this is industry standards, so that's where we need to get. It's too much too soon. It has to be done in steps. And that's another thing that you have to make everyone, so leadership, but also people who are very passionate and want to see change, that this is not going to happen overnight. And you have to be realistic that this may be a 2-year strategy to get us to that place. But we're going to do lots of things in between to make it feel better and for us to actually see the change.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, something that I'm a bit of a broken record in saying is the challenges that are trying to be overcome through a lot of diversity and inclusion in HR work relate to systemic issues that have been embedded over centuries. So to assume that that will be undone with a 2-year, 5-year plan is unrealistic. This is stuff that we have to start building the foundations and the bricks for. And I think you make a really good point there about recognizing where you are as a business and trying to reach that next step, as opposed to saying, we want to be doing exactly what that business is doing, because there's not a one size fits all solution that's going to work across every organization. Otherwise, we'd all have it completely right. Matt, going across to you, similar question. So how do we make sure that goals are met and the job is being done?
Yeah, it's hard to beat Yasmin's answer. I have to say she covered almost every single point really, really well. And maybe just to build on some of that, but it's already all there. And maybe speaking from my experience of coming into my organization just over a year ago, I was quite impressed with the way that Ogilvy had already made some decent strides into DE&I, but it had really done so without much of a focus strategy. But the folks who had been responsible for it, and it was kind of spread out among people as opposed to a dedicated resource, I think had done a really good job of making some headway. So I was starting at least from in a fertile environment, but I had to think very strategically about the plan when I came in. I still feel that it was about putting in the structure or the roots so that the following plan this year, for instance, could build on that. And when we're talking about goals, obviously I needed to think about prioritizing the plan. What would I focus on first in order for us to have the most kind of effect in terms of reaching our goals. And that was starting with leadership. So, our leadership team, our board of 36 people, including myself, I went on this program that I helped design. I was a civilian as well as someone who was, part of implementing it. We went through a 6-month inclusive leadership program because it was important to embed at the very, very top the building blocks of inclusive leadership, and for people to realize that it wasn't separate to leadership, it's what's expected now as a leader, and for people to see that they could integrate it into their own personal style, and that they could find a way to be an ally because it's different for everyone. What does that look like, and how can they do that, in a way that also builds better teams and builds better businesses. So when Yasmin talks about prioritizing, she's absolutely right. You have to prioritize your audiences first. You need to think about strategically, who do you start with? And so this year for me, having worked very much or focused on the very top of leadership last year, is cascading that down to the next tier down of leaders and all line managers, for instance. So you start to cascade that throughout the organization. So there is accountability, and that accountability is in the form of KPIs. So, our board now has 1 out of their 4 or 5 KPIs in their personal development plans. We call it career conversations, but, they are now held accountable for a DEI or ED&I goal in their actual performance reviews. So that was also part of the 6-month program, really noodling into what they could own and deliver. So although I'm kind of ultimately responsible for the delivery of the strategy as the ED&I director lead, accountability is spread. And when I spoke earlier about the fact that I don't have a team, I wish I did. I do get help 1 day a week from someone who sits in a client team, and she's fantastic, and she is supporting me, for 8 hours a week. But I don't really have a dedicated resource. But that aside, I need to work in a very matrix way. And when you hear that word matrix, I remember hearing that, thinking, well, what is that? I mean, it sounds really, it's one of those kind of buzz corporate words, but all it really means is in a cross-functional way. So, you have various matrices kind of interlinking with each other. And I will work with the talent acquisition team to deliver some of my projects clearly, right? When it comes to inclusive hiring, I will work with the L&D team, and the L&D team will deliver some of my work, which is about inclusive, knowledge building and skills building. That's what kind of matrix working is like. And that requires, in order for me to make sure I'm achieving my goals, I have to make sure I manage my stakeholders well, carefully, that people are very clear on the elements of their role that involve ED&I, that I give them the right support and impetus as necessary, but they're also therefore empowered to be able to deliver on pieces of that so that we can reach our goals. And if that's built into the plans, there are KPIs, and there are personal KPIs that we have in terms of our own individual performance as employees. There's KPIs that we have for our activities for the year, for all of our initiatives and projects. And there are those overall organizational KPIs that let's say I have in terms of how far we want to see representation improve in the next couple of years. And one thing I will say though, Kenya, is you're absolutely right. We're trying to overcome a lot of systemic challenges, a lot of barriers that have been put in place for many years, and dismantling some of those things takes time. But I also understand that my CEO can't wait 5 years necessarily for certain things, and it might be different in other organizations, but my organization is a business. It's a timesheet-led business. We do timesheets. And for anyone who works in a consultancy that bills time, the pressures related to that, and that can be very challenging. And because of that, I still need to think about ways in which I can show effectiveness, at least within a reasonable period and within a reasonable time, without compromising, for instance, in my opinion, the ensuring that we have built as much equity into the system. For instance, as a solid example, before, let's say, going on an inclusive or underrepresented diversity hiring spree, because the last thing I've ever wanted to do is to just bring people in without an organization being absolutely ready, built for them, understanding that bringing in people from different backgrounds means addressing their needs in different ways. You know, it's not the same for everyone. That's not what that's not what equity is. It's not treat everyone the same. It's not, you know, it's treat everyone as they need to be treated. And in so doing, you know, then you are ready to reach some of those. You kind of have to prioritize those goals, right? So for me, equity was definitely first. Build the equitable systems, and then, you know, you're then going into more kind of outcome goals around, you know, diversity and inclusion is the kind of wraparound surround sound, I always call it. Like there's always a surround sound inclusion thing going on. And when people talk about cultural events, for instance, and I know that, you know, I'm not just an events person. Yes, I do a lot of events, and there are times when I roll my eyes and I go, God, this is just another event. But I have to remember that it's not just another event. You're giving a certain community a sense of belonging. You're recognizing their culture. You're working with them on that, and you're always creating this background environment of the fact that we look to difference and that we celebrate it, and that can be a very powerful thing, which again pushes us to reach those goals as well. So there's a lot of things going on. But yeah, I mean, that's my build.
Yeah, and I think it was a great build. And there are two more questions that we want to get onto today, and I'm conscious that we probably have about 5 more minutes in total. And one of the things that I think both of you in your answers have kind of teased at there is KPIs, measurement. What is it that we're actually trying to measure, and how do we set that down on paper in a way that's going to allow our business to see that there is that growth? So I'll put that question a bit more specifically to you both. So do you have any advice on setting realistic yet ambitious KPIs, and how we can communicate those to stakeholders? I didn't say who would go first. Does anybody would like?
Yeah, happy to kick us off. I think I touched on it earlier in the sense of realistic is always where I want to aim for to start. So benchmark it, you know, doing a survey with the support of someone external is what I always use, because I'm not sitting here and saying that I am an ED&I expert. You know, HR is my specialism, and ED&I feeds into that. And I do a lot of reading, I do a lot of coaching, I do a lot of network. But it's not my sole role. It feeds into everything that I do. So when I am running surveys or doing training, I tend to usually get an outside source who, you know, a company, a person where they specialize in this, so that I feel confident that, you know, the survey, the questions, the training is relevant to what is happening at the moment. You know, they are the experts. They would have done a lot of research. There would have been a lot of kind of reading on their perspective. So I always work with someone external. Do a survey is always a good point. And then, like I said earlier, you know, setting your KPIs based on the data that you've got. It's always data driven. You know, not assumptions, not your own feelings, not other people's. It's just based on the data. This is where we are at the moment, and this is where I'd like to get to based on our current situation, no one external. And that is very realistic. And then when you get to a point where you're improving continuously, then you can start to think, okay, let's make this ambitious. Let's see what other people are kind of setting. For us at the moment, a big focus has previously been on underrepresented genders and ethnicities. You know, we're branching that out into social economic backgrounds, but then also, you know, there's so many KPIs that you could focus on. It's just understanding what your business objective is, what the mutual agreement or what the mutual benefit across the org is, and then understanding, okay, what area of that do I want to tackle right now? A big one is belonging, and that can feed into so many different things. And a KPI that we're looking at the moment is something called talent density. So actually, how do you get the best talent and retain those performers, and there's so much of EDI that falls into that in regards to that kind of sense of belonging, people feeling that they can voice to senior leaders when, you know, they're challenged and there's going to be no consequences regarding like a promotion or not getting onto a really good project that they've been wanting to get on. That all falls into EDI, and that talent density has such a return on investment for the business because we're retaining really strong performers. But in order to have strong performers, actually it's built on EDI. So it's kind of understanding the metrics that you're probably already reporting on, but actually how does EDI feed into this? So things like attrition, retention, when you actually dig into the data and you think, okay, what are the reason people are leaving? And a lot of it, you know, is down to EDI factors and you know, pillars. So it's not always the obvious EDI metrics that you need to be looking at. Sometimes there's more HR focused metrics that are actually built on EDI. So yeah, and I think, yeah, setting a realistic target, knowing what your vision is as well. So like a vision statement, I've seen a lot of people do things like charters, haven't personally like played around with one of those, but yeah, like some kind of vision statement's always a good place, especially if you're going to cross collaborate. I think too many voices, you can quite easily, you know, get off track. So I think going out there with a vision statement is a great starting point, and then yeah, doing your metrics and not being afraid as well to be like, actually I don't feel like we're getting much value out of this and we want to switch it up is okay. I think that's where the best things come from, in admitting that you tried something and actually you didn't feel like you got what you wanted from it, so we're going to look at something else is okay as well. It's about being innovative.
Yeah, and you know, learning how to fail quickly and take lessons.
Yeah,
Matt,
100%.
same question to you with the awareness that we have 3 minutes on the clock.
Yeah, so just to be clear, is it how do we come up, or how do we agree with our stakeholders what the KPI should be? Is that the question, Kenya?
So it's how do you set KPIs? So advice on setting KPIs and
Yeah.
what it might look like.
So in terms of, yeah, so Yasmin again has got it right. You know, it does have to be data driven. We do need to know what the organization looks like. When your organization is as big as mine, though, I suppose the watch out is there's a lot of gaps. You don't always know. We know that gathering data, it can be very tricky. It's not mandatory for people to disclose. There are times when we capture that data when people arrive, they get a new joiner form, they can or cannot, or they don't need to disclose their ethnic background, or other questions we ask them about their ability or disabilities or sexual orientation. If they feel willing to, they capture it. So we have that, but we still don't track that. But we will ask it again, let's say, you know, when we run an employee survey. So we're only ever as good as the data we have as a baseline. So we will obviously look at the data that we've got. There's a certain level of extrapolation that we have to do because there's a bunch of unknowns. So we're not dealing with the best data, but it's enough for us to be able to make some educated assumptions or guesses about the state of where we are, whether it be, you know, representation, or whether it be to do with certain attitudes towards our organization in terms of that sense of belonging, inclusion, etc. Some people are forthcoming in surveys and they will fill something out and give us a good qualitative comment. Others will not. But with that, we look at, you know, again, Yasmin said industry standards. What are those benchmarks? Also thinking about it from a geographical perspective. My organization is in London. What does London look like? We want to be representative of the communities that we sit within. And, you know, currently, for instance, looking at our KPIs on representation, we are 10% off of where we need to be within the next year and a half. We should be setting ambitious, but you know, reachable targets. And setting them took some time for us because it did require some of our most senior stakeholders and the C-suite to sit around the table and agree. And the other thing is that in order to kind of help us reach those goals and set those KPIs in my business, EDI is also seen as what has been designated as a business risk, which sounds like a bad thing, but it's a good thing. It means that our business takes it seriously. it needs to be managed well in order to ensure that there is no negative impact on the organization. So we have support from a compliance team as well that helps put controls in place to make sure that the projects that I initiate all, hopefully reach their goals. So yeah, that's part of the advantage of working for a larger organization, I suppose.
That's incredible. And sadly, we are at time now. I think there's so much more that we could continue to talk about. There's been some incredible questions coming through in the chat as well, which we won't have time to get onto today. But what we will do is send as much follow-up information as we can in the email that will come out to everybody. Another reminder that there is a webinar next month on overcoming resistance to change. And I think some of the questions that we've seen come through will be answered in that. So please do sign up. And I think the only thing that's left for me to do is thank you both, Yasmin and Matt, for joining us. I always love these chats, and I think this has been one of the strongest. So this has been incredible for me as well. So thank you for joining. Thank you to everybody who joined us today and for the engagement in the chat. As I said, we'll follow up with more information and resources. I think there was a question, Matt, around your inclusive leadership program and what that looks like. So we'll get as much information to everybody as possible.
And there's one on data gaps. So I think that's Kate. So I'll work with Kenya to see if we can respond offline.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And everybody enjoy the rest of your weeks.